The mission of the Clarke Historical Museum is to celebrate the rich and varied history of Northwestern California by preserving, sharing, and interpreting that history in ways that increase knowledge, engage the mind, enrich the spirit, and stimulate the imagination.
Thank you for joining us at the Clarke Historical Museum's Night at the Museum fundraising event. My name is Alexander Cox, and I am the Registrar for the Clarke Historical Museum. I'm here today with Mr. Chuck Petty. Chuck, would you like to introduce yourself to our guests?
Well, my name's Chuck Petty, or Charles Petty, and I've been the treasurer of the Clarke Museum for a number of years and been involved with the organization, and I love everything that Clarke does.
And I know that you're with a few other organizations here in our Humboldt County. Can you give us who else you're a part of?
Well, besides the Clarke, which I've been involved with since the 90s, I've also been involved with Eureka Heritage Society since the early 90s, and I'm currently board president of that organization. I'm also involved with the Humboldt County Historical Society, and I've been on their board for the past 6 years, and was on the Eureka Theater's board for 19 years. So, yeah, been involved with historical organizations for a long time.
Bit of a passion for you?
You might say that, yes.
All right. So what brought you up to Humboldt County, and how long have you lived here and where?
Well, nothing brought me up to Humboldt County since I was born and raised here. So I came here as a newborn from General Hospital.
So you're a local native born, huh?
My grandparents came to Eureka and Humboldt County via Minnesota from Finland in 1906, 1907. And they established a property out in Cutten where Murphy's Market is now. That was my grandfather's ranch. So that's where I grew up until I was about 6 years old when my aunt sold the property. So I was a Cutten native, if you want to say it that way.
Oh, that's cool. I live out in Cutten.
Okay,
It's
so
nice.
the house next to Murphy's Market that kind of sits way back to the left if you're facing it from Walnut, all that property and where Fry's Care Home is with my grandfather's ranch.
Wow. Yeah, I walk past there all the time. Cool. Small world.
Yes, it used to be an old farmhouse on the corner, and we had a house that was in between the farmhouse and the next house. And so, yeah, I grew up out there, and we moved to another house in Cutten after my aunt sold that property. So I've just been a Cutten and Eureka native forever.
Huh. That's so cool. What did you, I mean, what did you used to do, as a kid? What was your favorite thing to do around here?
Oh, I'd love to go to Sequoia Park and ride my bike around Sequoia Park and go up all the trails and explore and
Mm-hmm.
anything that was interesting, I would explore. I used to try to get into all the old buildings in Eureka, and there were a lot that have been torn down since I was born, especially along the waterfront, a lot of the old warehouses and stuff. Eureka was a bustling port, and it was a lot more active, like a lot more activities along the coastline than there are now.
Mm. So I think you already answered this question, but how long have you been a part of the Clarke Historical Museum, and what are some of the changes you've seen while you've been a part of it?
Well, I could say I've known about the Clarke since I was born because my mom had Cecile Clarke for a history teacher at Eureka High School back in the 40s. And I was less than 1 year old when the Clarke Historical Museum was founded. And I remember coming here as a child with elementary school trips. And Cecile was here, and the Reverend Carl Eckes, who was the first director. And I remember it being, that was before Neelis Hall, when the museum was just in the historic bank building. And it was like grandma's attic. There were things stuffed and piled everywhere. It was a delight for a child to explore all this old stuff.
Okay. Um, so I know that historical architecture is a passion of yours. What do you love most about the Clarke Historical Museum building?
Well, the building itself is a fabulous example of Beaux Arts architecture designed by the San Francisco architect Albert Pisi, who was very well known for his Beaux Arts architecture, the Hibernia Bank building in San Francisco from 1892 and other very significant buildings in the area. It's a very classical, symmetrical building, and it is just a wonderful example of style. So it's very unique for Eureka. I mean, the Beaux Arts movement was sweeping the United States in the early 1900s, so it's not unusual, but for Eureka, it's a pretty beautiful example of the architectural trend that was sweeping the United States, which we don't have too many examples of. We're more known for our Victorian architecture than our Beaux Arts architecture.
The Morris Graves Museum building, wasn't that built around the same time that the Clarke Museum building was built?
It's a bit older. I think the cornerstone on the Morris Graves, which was at Carnegie Library, was 1902. Yes. Yeah, it's of the same time period, and you could lump it in with that Beaux Arts movement.
Hmm.
The City Beautiful movement and Beaux Arts, and having monumental, very solid structures that people could have confidence in.
So it was mostly building public buildings then that
Beaux
were
Arts
part
is-
of that
yeah,
movement.
the Beaux Arts movement is mostly known for public and commercial buildings. Yes.
Hmm.
It's not
Okay.
really a residential style that was followed. Not much, anyways.
What about Neelis Hall? Was there any kind of special interest given into its design when it was first built? Do you know?
Well, it's really a design of its period from the late 1970s, and it was built mostly to showcase the Native American collections, not so much to showcase the architecture. But
Okay.
it used state-of-the-art design guidelines for the era and what museums were using to, it has, now they've been kind of obscured, but it has north-facing skylights that were meant to introduce natural light, but not direct natural light, so it wouldn't fade the collections. There's things like that were looked at when the design was drawn up. But as far as it being very interesting architecturally on the exterior, that wasn't the focus. It was meant to have the interior be a good showcase for the Native American collection.
Okay. I didn't know that. That's cool. So what are some of your favorite buildings or architectural features here around Humboldt County?
Well, Humboldt County is replete with a lot of different architectural styles. That's what's so great about Eureka and the surrounding communities, is that there are dozens and dozens of examples of different architectural styles, starting in the 1850s. Very few left from that era, but through the Victorian era and onto the 20th century, there are, colonial style architecture. It was brought over from New England when the first settlers came here. And then some of the earlier Victorian styles, the Italianate and the East Lake, Queen Anne. We had such a abundance of timber and building materials here at a reasonable price, and lots of mills and molding mills to make all sorts of profiles. So the Victorian architecture styles, they exploded in Eureka, and we have so many wonderful examples that have survived. I was just studying a report that the city of Eureka did in 1974 on Old Town and Downtown, and that report identified 57 buildings of historical note, and all but 3 of them are still in existence and in use today for their original purposes. So we've had a lot of experience with preserving old buildings, where a lot of cities have cleared and demolished their downtowns and old towns and residential areas. So we have a lot more preserved historic buildings than a lot of cities have.
Yeah, we do have a lot of people that come in constantly asking, are there tours of our local Victorians? Yeah.
Well, and the Heritage Society is currently working on a new set of tours, so that will be coming soon.
Oh, that's exciting.
Mhm.
We'll have something to tell people when they come and asking about, if there's just like outside tours, or is it going to be inside tours too?
Well, that's harder to do because you're getting into people's private spaces. So yes, the inside tours are more like things that the Eureka Heritage Society does on an annual basis, their home garden tour, where the houses are opened up to the public. But as just coming into town at any one time, it's hard to find an interior tour, except for public spaces like the Clarke.
Would you have any recommendations of interesting buildings to go look at if we have tourists coming in and asking for recommendations?
Well, there are all sorts of interesting buildings, and there are tours that the Heritage Society put together years ago that are still valid. You know, walking tours and driving tours, and there are little pockets like the Hillsdale neighborhood and Henderson Center. There are different pockets from different eras. The city of Eureka, oh, I didn't mention this, but I was also on the city of Eureka's Historic Preservation Commission for 27 years. They developed with outside consultants a website called eurekahistory.com. And you can go on that, and there are tours on that website that will direct you around the city. And if you click on the link for each of the buildings, it will give you a little history and a photograph of the building if we have that available. So I don't think that's very well publicized, but eurekahistory.com is a great place to start if you want to tour Eureka and the surrounding areas.
That's fantastic. That's good to know. So it's a bit like the Green Book in that way?
It is. It kind of takes the Green Book as a basis and was expanded from there to include a lot more than the Green Book. The Green Book was based on a survey the Eureka Heritage Society did in the early 1970s of all 10,000 buildings in Eureka, but only 1,600 are included in the Green Book as the most significant buildings. So there's a basis with those 1,600, but there's a lot more to Eureka.
Hmm. Has there been any thought about updating the Green Book recently?
Well, since it was researched in the 70s and published in 1986, yes, I mean, it's become a little out of date in some areas. And we have discussed that recently at board meetings about whether we want to reprint the current publication or actually start research for a new publication, because we're coming down to the last few dozen of the books that we've had printed in the last two print cycles. So,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, going for more online versions to digital versions. So
Okay.
yes.
I know some people have been wondering about that. Are there any buildings that no longer exist that you wish were still here?
Well, yes, there are. I mean, we were talking about the success of preservation in Eureka, but there also were some losses.
Hmm.
So next to the Eureka Inn, the block bounded by 7th and 8th and E and F, where Sherwin-Williams Paint Store is now.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle of that block sat the 1884 H.H. Booner Mansion. And it was,
Oh, is that where that was?
a stunning piece of architecture that faced East Street in the Eastlake style. And it was in completely original condition because Captain Booner's daughter lived there from when the house was built in 1884 until she passed away in 1954. Unfortunately, the family didn't preserve it, but there are other mansions or large houses in Eureka. There was the David Evans house on the corner of E and 6th, and across the street where Picky is, there was the Stafford Mansion. And Captain Booner's son, Henry Jr., had another mansion at the corner of C and Grant that is no longer there. I mean, there are lots of grand mansions that came down because they were just white elephants by the 40s and 50s. People didn't want to maintain them. They were so large and they were, you know, expensive to heat. And that ornate style had gone out of style. So some of them were converted to apartment houses, but a lot of them were demolished because they took up so much room and people need housing. So, you know, they were repurposed into other things. But those are the four that I can think of that I miss. And I wish I would have seen, along with the Amelia and Sumner Carson Mansion, where the Time Standard building is at, but their address was 615 J Street. It was a beautiful, beautiful house built. We talked about the Beaux Arts style, but it's built in that era. And if any residential architecture Eureka could have been considered Beaux Arts, it was the Amelia and C. Sumner Carson Mansion, built in 1915, 1916. And it sat in the middle of the block, like the Booner Mansion, surrounded by gardens and beautiful rhododendrons. And it was just a showplace.
What about the courthouse? Why was that torn down? The old one, the original one.
Well, the courthouse is built in the 1880s of unreinforced masonry. So, you know, Humboldt County has earthquakes.
Oh, okay.
There's a famous photo of the courthouse after the 1906 earthquake, and it had uh, various allegorical statues around the roof line and the statue of Minerva on the top of the tower.
Mhm.
After the 1906 earthquake, there is a definite lean to Minerva. She's kind of pitching out over the city because of the earthquake damage. And so that was the first big earthquake that did some damage to this building. So
Okay.
those statues were removed at that time. In 1924, they were painting the tower, and some painter's torch caught the tower on fire, and it was damaged. So the whole top of the tower was remodeled in a different style,
Mm.
and a beacon was put on top in the place of Minerva, the statue, that was then uh, not shuttered, but was turned off during World War II because it was, was a beacon that would show people where the city was, and we didn't want that
Mhm.
during war times. But and then in 1947, 48, there was a famous article in the local paper, Times or the Standard, I don't remember, but it asked the citizens of Eureka if they wanted the tower removed or not, because there were some structural issues, but they also wanted to modernize the building because it looked too Victorian for them. So at that time, the tower, which contained a beautiful clock with chimes that chimed on the quarter hour, that
Mm.
was removed. So in the last years of the courthouse, it looked pretty truncated and not like an original 1884, 1888 Victorian building.
Mhm.
And then we had another major earthquake in 1884, 1954, that kind of finished the courthouse off. Also, it also very badly damaged our 1904 City Hall that used to be at the corner of 3rd and G. So both of those civic structures were heavily damaged in 1954 and then later demolished in the later 50s and replaced by modern buildings. So
So the
our current courthouse and our current city hall both date from the late 1950s.
yeah. So the original courthouse and the original city hall, were they built during the same time period?
No, City Hall was built in 1904. The courthouse was built in the 1880s, so almost 20 years before that. And they weren't the originals. There was another courthouse before that 1880s courthouse,
Oh, okay. Where was
much
that one?
much more down towards the waterfront.
Okay, that's cool.
So it's just a succession of buildings that served the civic functions of the county and the city over the years. Yeah.
Mhm. It's just quite amazing the different architectural styles of, the original courthouse and what we have now. So,
Having just spent 3 weeks on a manslaughter trial as a juror in the current courthouse, I can attest that it's much plainer than the Victorian courthouse.
mm,
It's a very severe building inside and out as far as architectural style. Yes. Some
mm.
people love that mid-century style. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's much plainer and more severe than any of the previous civic buildings that were in Eureka and Humboldt County.
So what has changed about Humboldt County since you've been here? As long as you've been here.
Well, I'd say mostly the economy has changed. It was really focused around timbering and fishing when I was a kid. So
Mm.
the lumber industry has gone through a huge change, and that is not. It's still a part of our economy, but it's not a major part of our economy like it was, in the Victorian era and through the 1960s and 70s. There's much more awareness of not over logging. With the Charles Hurwitz's Maxam takeover of Pacific Lumber Company and how he accelerated logging in the 80s, we became very aware of how quickly our old growth forests were going away. So it's good that that's not a major part of our economy anymore, like it was, because we can now sustainably harvest our forests and still use their products, but not decimate them. And the same with the fishing industry. It's not as big as it used to be, even though it's still a good part of our economy.
Where do you think we're going to go in the future for Humboldt County? You know?
Well, I think people are coming here to escape some of the more densely populated areas of the state. And I think Cal Poly Humboldt also brings a lot of people to the area because of the world-class education you can get here and all the recreational activities you can do here, like biking and skiing and hiking and all. It's just a wonderful outdoor area. So if you like anything to do with the outdoors, Humboldt County is a great place to be and to get away from the hustle and bustle of the big metropolitan area. So I think that's more the direction we're going as far as the future of Humboldt County.
Recreational tourism?
Recreational tourism and, living a simpler life.
Hmm.
So many things can be done online now that you can actually live in a more remote area and still participate in commerce and other areas of business. And
You can be a hermit, but still be connected to the rest of the world.
I wouldn't go quite that far, but yeah.
Okay, well, last question. So, why does history matter to you?
Well, I've always been obsessed with history, probably because I lost my dad when I was 4 years old. So I was always wondering what he was like and what his history was like. But we had good family friends that introduced me to local history because they were longtime members of the Historical Society. And I went to meetings with them as a kid. But I think history matters as it roots us in our past and prepares us for our future. It gives us perspective for problem solving based on how past events were, how we solve problems in past events. So I think history is very important for the future because it shows us how things were done, how they could be done, also how we can improve on the past, things that didn't turn out so well in the past, and gives us an education on how not to do things. So I think the past is important for our future.
Yeah, as the saying goes, if you don't learn from your past, you're doomed to repeat it.
That's the cliche, yes, and there's some truth to that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chuck.
Thanks, Alex, and I hope the Night at the Museum event fundraiser for the Clarke is a huge success.